Elias had always loved exploring. From a young age, he had a curiosity that often led him into places where others hesitated to go. He was a human researcher, tasked with studying the jungles of distant planets, documenting life forms, and understanding ecosystems. His latest assignment had brought him to a planet that was beautiful yet dangerous, with thick forests, towering trees, and strange creatures hiding among the shadows. The locals warned him that some species here were hostile, and humans had to be careful. But Elias was determined to see everything for himself. One morning, as the sun barely touched the tops of the massive trees, Elias packed his gear and walked into the dense forest. The air was humid, filled with the smells of wet earth and wild flowers. Birds sang in a language only the wind seemed to understand, and small animals scurried beneath the foliage. Elias moved quietly, aware of every sound. He carried a small scanner to detect living beings nearby, not just animals, but intelligent creatures too. Hours passed, and Elias had seen many ordinary creatures. But then something unusual caught his eye. A soft rustling came from a cluster of ferns far off the main path. It was too deliberate to be the wind, too small to be any animal he knew. Elias crouched low and moved closer, careful not to make a sound. As he parted the leaves, he froze. There, lying on the forest floor, was a hatchling unlike anything he had seen. Its skin shimmered faintly in the sunlight, and its eyes were large and round, full of fear. It was tiny, no bigger than a human toddler, but there was an intelligence in its gaze that Elias could not ignore. He realized with a mixture of excitement and worry that this creature was the offspring of a species humans had always regarded as hostile. Stories told of their sharp instincts, their strength, and their territorial nature. Normally, humans and this alien species kept their distance from each other, avoiding conflict whenever possible. But this hatchling was alone, injured, and helpless. Its leg appeared to be wounded, and it shivered as if cold or afraid. Elias felt a rush of emotion he could not control. He knew the risks. If any patrols from his own people or from the alien species discovered him, the consequences could be severe. Yet something inside him refused to leave the small creature to its fate. Without thinking, he gently lifted it into his arms. The hatchling's eyes widened, and it emitted a soft, melodic sound, almost like a plea. Elias spoke softly, though he doubted it would understand his words. "It's okay. I won't hurt you. I'll help." He carefully examined its leg. The injury was not deep, but it needed attention. He had basic medical tools, enough to clean and bandage the wound. The hatchling flinched at first, but Elias worked patiently, speaking softly, allowing it to grow accustomed to his presence. Slowly, it seemed to understand that he was not a threat. For hours, Elias stayed by its side. He found water for the hatchling to drink, and some edible plants he had identified earlier. He noticed the way it studied him, its eyes tracking every movement. There was a curiosity, a spark, that made Elias feel a connection he had never expected. He realized that this creature was not just an animal. It was intelligent, capable of emotion, and aware of its surroundings. Protecting it was no longer a simple act of mercy. It had become personal. As the day turned to evening, the forest grew darker, and strange sounds echoed around them. Elias knew that staying in one place was dangerous. Predators, both natural and alien, could be near. He needed to move, but he also could not leave the hatchling vulnerable. He created a small temporary shelter using leaves and branches, ensuring the creature was safe for the night. As he worked, the hatchling clung to him briefly, a gesture of trust that made his heart tighten. Elias reflected on the situation. He had been trained for field work, for survival in difficult environments, but this was different. This was not about science alone. It was about responsibility, empathy, and courage. He thought about the warnings he had received from other researchers, and the stories of humans who had faced hostility from this species. Yet, he felt an inner certainty that protecting this hatchling was the right thing to do. Somehow, he knew that his actions here could change more than just one life. That night, Elias stayed awake beside the small creature, listening to the forest around them. The hatchling rested against him, breathing softly, and Elias felt a profound sense of purpose. He thought about what might happen tomorrow, if they were discovered, if the hatchling's parents arrived, if patrols passed by. Every possibility carried danger, but he could not abandon it. In the quiet moments before dawn, Elias watched the hatchling sleep and realized something else. He was forming a bond that went beyond species, beyond fear and prejudice. He had entered this jungle as a human researcher, observing life from a distance, but now he was a protector, responsible for a life that could alter the balance between worlds. The weight of that responsibility was heavy, yet it was also inspiring. When the first light of morning filtered through the trees, Elias prepared to move again. He gently picked up the hatchling, whispered reassurances, and set out on a path deeper into the forest. Every step required caution. Every sound had to be measured. Yet with the hatchling in his arms, Elias felt a new kind of strength. He understood that this was the beginning of an extraordinary journey, one that would test his courage, his loyalty, and his humanity. By the time the sun was fully up, Elias had navigated several miles of dense forest, avoiding dangers and finding safe places for the hatchling to rest. Each moment of interaction deepened their connection. He had learned to interpret its subtle gestures, the tilt of its head, the sound it made when frightened, the way it responded to calm voices. He realized that this tiny life, seemingly so fragile, was teaching him lessons about trust, compassion, and courage that he could not have learned from books or lectures. Elias knew the days ahead would be difficult. He might face enemies on both sides, humans who could not understand his choice and aliens who might see him as a threat. But for now, as he looked at the hatchling nestled safely in his arms, he felt hope. He had made a choice to protect, and in doing so, he had embarked on a path that would change not just his life, but possibly the lives of many others. And so, with cautious steps and a watchful eye, Elias continued deeper into the jungle, unaware of the challenges and discoveries that awaited him, but certain of one truth. He would shield this innocent life, no matter the cost, because some bonds are worth risking everything. Elias had spent the first day navigating the forest with the hatchling, but the challenges were only beginning. The jungle was alive with movement and sounds that were both beautiful and threatening. Birds with bright feathers called to each other, while unseen creatures rustled in the undergrowth. Elias moved carefully, knowing that any sudden sound could attract predators, or worse, members of the alien species who might see him as a threat. Yet, with the hatchling in his arms, he felt a determination stronger than fear. He had promised to protect it, and he intended to keep that promise. As the hours passed, Elias began to notice the hatchling's unique behaviors. It had a remarkable sense of awareness, even for a creature so young. It would tilt its head, scanning the environment with wide, intelligent eyes. It responded to Elias's tone of voice, relaxing when he spoke softly and tensing when the forest made sudden noises. Elias realized that this hatchling was learning from him just as he was learning from it. Every small gesture, every sound, was a form of communication. Though he did not understand the hatchling's language, he could feel its emotions. Elias knew he needed to keep the hatchling fed and safe. He had brought supplies with him, water, rations, and medical tools, but the creature also needed more than that. It needed comfort, protection, and guidance. He began to set up a routine, walking during the cooler parts of the day, finding safe spots to rest, and teaching the hatchling to respond to simple commands like staying close or being quiet when danger was near. Each day, the bond between them grew stronger. The hatchling would reach out to touch his hands, nuzzle against his chest, or make small, musical sounds that Elias could only interpret as trust or happiness. But the jungle was not forgiving. On the second day, Elias encountered his first serious challenge. A group of predators, large and silent, stalked them from the shadows. Elias felt his heart race as he realized that the hatchling was vulnerable. He knew he could not outrun the creatures, so he had to think quickly. Using a combination of his own knowledge of the forest and the tools he carried, he created a small diversion. He tossed a rock to one side, causing a rustle in the leaves. The predator's attention shifted and Elias seized the moment to move to a safer path. The hatchling clung to him, shivering, but Elias whispered reassurances, stroking its head, gently. It seemed to understand, calming slightly under his touch. Later, as they rested beside a clear stream, Elias reflected on the situation. He had read about the intelligence of this alien species, but experiencing it firsthand was different. This hatchling was not just smart. It was aware, capable of emotion, and capable of forming attachments. He realized that the small creature saw him not just as a protector, but as a companion. This bond would be crucial in the days ahead, especially because he knew that sooner or later, they would have to face members of the hatchling's own species. How would they react to a human holding one of their young? Elias did not know, but he hoped that the trust they had built would protect them both. As they moved through the forest, Elias began to notice more signs of the alien colony. Strange markings on tree trunks, unusual plants arranged in patterns, and faint trails suggested that intelligent beings were nearby. He also realized that he was being watched, not in the way predators watched prey, but in a careful, calculating way, as if someone or something was assessing his intentions. Elias's pulse quickened. He knew that discovery could come at any moment, and he had to be ready. Over the next few days, he experimented with different ways to communicate with the hatchling. He learned to interpret its subtle gestures. A flick of the tail, a change in eye color, or a particular sound could indicate fear, curiosity, or hunger. He used these signals to guide them through the forest, avoiding dangers and finding safe places to rest. The hatchling, in turn, seemed to learn from him. It began to follow his instructions more reliably, showing that it trusted him completely. Elias realized that this mutual understanding was rare and precious. Despite the growing bond, Elias faced internal conflict. He had been trained to observe without interfering, to record and report, not to involve himself emotionally. But the hatchling had changed that. Protecting it was no longer just a choice, it was a responsibility that consumed his every thought. He found himself thinking ahead, imagining possible encounters with the alien colony, and strategizing how to keep the hatchling safe. Each night, as he watched the creature sleep, he felt a mixture of pride, fear, and hope. One morning, Elias woke to find the hatchling staring at him intently. Its eyes seemed to question him, as if asking what lay ahead. He smiled and whispered, "We'll be okay, I promise." Then he noticed something unusual, small footprints nearby that were not his own. He realized they were the tracks of another creature, likely one of the hatchling's kin. His heart pounded. The alien colony could be close, and with it, the possibility of confrontation. Yet he did not panic. He had prepared for this. He had trained, observed, and learned the ways of this forest. Most importantly, he had built trust with the hatchling. Over the following days, Elias navigated increasingly complex challenges. He had to cross rivers, avoid aggressive animals, and find food sources that would sustain both him and the hatchling. Each obstacle required careful planning and quick thinking. Sometimes the hatchling would react in ways he did not expect, darting toward danger or making sounds of distress. Elias learned to anticipate these reactions and adapt accordingly. Their partnership became a delicate dance of trust, instinct, and mutual support. By the end of the week, Elias felt a deep sense of accomplishment. He had not only kept the hatchling alive, but had begun to understand its world. He had learned to interpret its gestures, respond to its needs, and protect it from dangers both seen and unseen. The hatchling, in turn, had shown remarkable resilience and intelligence, adapting to life outside its nest and forming a bond with a human it had never known before. Elias realized that their journey was far from over. The alien colony was still nearby, and eventually, they would have to confront the parents or leaders who might not be so understanding. But for now, they had built a foundation of trust, and that trust was powerful. It was a bridge between two species, fragile yet strong, and it gave Elias hope. He understood that compassion and courage could change outcomes in ways that force alone could not. As night fell, Elias and the hatchling settled beneath a canopy of leaves. The sounds of the forest surrounded them, a mix of gentle breezes, distant, calls and the soft rustling of unseen creatures. Elias looked down at the small creature curled against his chest and smiled. They had survived the first week together, learning from each other, trusting each other, and forming a bond that neither could have anticipated. And in that quiet moment, Elias felt something he had never felt before, a certainty that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. He had entered the forest as a cautious researcher, but he had become a protector, a guide, and a friend. The journey was only beginning, but already it had changed him forever. After several days of careful travel through the forest, Elias and the hatchling sensed a change in the atmosphere. The air was heavier, charged with a quiet energy that made him alert. Strange sounds echoed in the distance, low, melodic calls that seemed more structured than the random noises of the jungle. Elias instinctively knew that they were nearing the alien colony. The hatchling stiffened in his arms, its eyes wide, scanning every shadow. Elias felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. He had protected it from countless dangers in the forest, but now they were approaching the heart of its world, a place where their presence could provoke fear, suspicion, or anger. They came to a clearing surrounded by enormous, ancient trees. Strange structures, organic and alive, shaped like spiraling towers of wood and vines, rose from the forest floor. These were not built in the way humans constructed homes. They seemed to grow from the ground itself, as if the colony were part of the jungle. The air carried the scent of flowers unfamiliar to Elias, mixed with a subtle chemical aroma he could not identify. The hatchling made soft, urgent noises, pressing closer to him. Elias whispered, "It's okay. We're almost safe." Suddenly, from the tallest of the organic towers, a figure appeared. It was the alien queen. She was unlike anything Elias had imagined. Her body was tall and elegant, covered in a shimmering skin that reflected the sunlight in gentle patterns. Her eyes, large and glowing faintly, locked onto Elias and the hatchling. She moved with a grace that suggested both power and intelligence. Every motion was precise, deliberate, and full of authority. Elias froze, unsure of what to do next. He knew that any wrong move could provoke hostility. Yet he could not let fear prevent him from fulfilling his promise to the hatchling. The queen descended toward them, her presence commanding silence in the clearing. The hatchling stirred in Elias's arms, chirping softly. Elias set it down gently, keeping a protective hand near it. He did not move toward the queen, but he did not step back either. Instead, he remained calm, showing through his posture and expression that he meant no harm. The queen circled them slowly, observing every detail, her gaze penetrating. Elias felt as though she could see not just his actions but his thoughts and intentions. After a tense moment, the queen spoke, not in words Elias could understand, but in sounds that resonated in his chest. The hatchling responded immediately, making soft, melodic noises that seemed like a conversation. Elias realized that the queen was communicating directly with the young creature, checking on its safety and well-being. The hatchling chirped back, and Elias understood then that the bond he had built with it mattered. The queen could sense the trust between them, and it was influencing her reaction. Elias took a deep breath. He could not speak the queen's language, but he tried other forms of communication. He gestured gently toward the hatchling, then himself, showing that he was its protector. He made soft, reassuring sounds, careful not to appear threatening. The queen paused, tilting her head as if considering his meaning. It was a moment of delicate negotiation, where every gesture and sound carried weight. Elias realized that he was being judged not just as a human intruder, but as someone capable of understanding and respecting her species. Hours passed in this silent exchange. Elias learned to watch the queen's subtle signals, tiny movements of her limbs, shifts in her posture, changes in her glowing eyes. The hatchling remained close to him, occasionally chirping in response to her sounds. Slowly, he began to notice a change in her demeanor. The rigid tension in her body softened. Her movements became less sharp, and her gaze, while still intense, carried curiosity rather than anger. Elias felt a small surge of hope. His care for the hatchling had created an unexpected bridge between them. Over the next few days, Elias and the hatchling remained near the colony under the Queen's watchful eyes. He observed her rituals and daily patterns, noting how she interacted with other members of her species. He learned that the colony had strict rules about protection, respect, and hierarchy. Any human intrusion could have been deadly, yet she allowed him to stay. Elias realized that this was unprecedented. His courage, patience, and empathy had earned him a measure of trust that few humans could achieve. The Queen tested him in subtle ways. Sometimes she would send young members of her species to observe him, watching how he handled challenges or how he responded to the hatchling's needs. Other times, she would present situations where he had to make quick decisions, balancing safety with respect for their culture. Each test was a measure of his understanding, his patience, and his ability to protect life without aggression. The hatchling's trust in him seemed to guide the Queen's judgment as much as his own actions. Elias learned to navigate these trials carefully. He began to mimic some of the colony's gestures, understanding that respect could be shown through body language as well as words. He found small ways to demonstrate his commitment, such as arranging leaves or offering food in the patterns he had observed among the alien children. The Queen watched closely, her glowing eyes noting every detail. Slowly, a silent acknowledgement formed between them, a recognition that Elias was not an enemy, but someone who could coexist, someone who could care for her offspring without violating the colony's rules. The bond between Elias and the hatchling continued to deepen. The young creature began to respond to the Queen's presence with confidence, chirping and moving around, Elias in a way that showed it felt safe. Elias realized that the hatchling's trust in him was not just about survival. It was about creating a connection that could influence the entire colony. He began to understand the significance of his role, not just as a protector but as a bridge between species. By the end of the week, Elias felt a profound change in the Queen. She no longer approached with sharp suspicion, but observed with careful interest. She allowed him small freedoms within the colony, observing how he managed the hatchling and interacted with others. Elias realized that this trust was fragile. One wrong move could undo it. But the experience also showed him the power of empathy, patience, and understanding. By protecting the hatchling and demonstrating respect for the colony's ways, he had earned a position no human had held before. Elias reflected on the journey so far. He had entered the forest as a cautious explorer, faced dangers in the wild, and built a bond with a fragile, intelligent life. Now he stood at the edge of a colony, in the presence of the alien Queen herself, and felt that trust and respect had begun to bridge a gap centuries in the making. The hatchling chirped happily, sensing the peace in the moment. Elias smiled, realizing that their journey had reached a new phase, a delicate, exciting, and unprecedented chapter in the story of human and alien interaction. He understood that challenges remained. The Queen could still test him further, and other members of her species might not accept him as easily. But for now, he had achieved something extraordinary. He had proven that compassion, courage, and respect could overcome fear and suspicion, even between species considered natural enemies. And with the hatchling safe, growing, and learning alongside him, Elias knew that their story was only just beginning. The days that followed were unlike anything Elias had experienced before. The alien Queen had allowed him to remain near the colony, but her acceptance was not full. It was conditional. Elias could feel it in the way she watched him closely, the way others in the colony studied his every move. He understood that his bond with the hatchling had bought him time, but now he had to prove himself worthy of their trust. From the very beginning, the colony tested him. The first test came quietly. One morning, as Elias prepared food for the hatchling, a group of older aliens approached. They carried strange objects, woven branches shaped into patterns he could not understand. They placed them in front of him, watching his reaction. Elias realized they wanted to see how he responded. He studied the objects carefully, noticing they were arranged in a sequence almost like a puzzle. He gently copied the pattern with nearby leaves and sticks. The elders exchanged glances, their eyes glowing softly. Elias had not solved the puzzle perfectly, but his effort showed respect. He could see the queen observing from a distance, her expression unreadable. The second test was more dangerous. A storm swept through the jungle, bringing heavy rains and fierce winds. The hatchling panicked, chirping loudly and clinging to Elias. Trees cracked in the distance and water flooded their shelter. The aliens watched silently as Elias struggled to protect the small creature. He carried the hatchling on his shoulders, wading through waist-deep water to find higher ground. Lightning split the sky and thunder shook the earth, but Elias kept moving, whispering calm words even though his own heart raced. By the time the storm passed, he was soaked and exhausted, yet the hatchling remained safe. When the queen approached, her eyes glowed with something softer than suspicion, acknowledgement. But the hardest test was not physical. It was about loyalty. One afternoon, Elias spotted a human patrol in the distance. They were searching, scanning the jungle with advanced equipment. His heart sank. If they found him with the hatchling, disaster could follow. He remembered his mission, the rules of his people, and the expectations placed upon him as a researcher. Yet as he looked down at the hatchling, whose eyes sparkled with trust, he knew his decision. He led the hatchling away from the humans, hiding deep within the alien colony's shadows. By doing so, Elias had chosen sides. He had placed the life of the hatchling above his own people's approval. The queen must have sensed his choice, for that night she approached him directly. For the first time, she lowered her tall, elegant frame to his level. She extended one hand, not in threat, but in acknowledgement. Elias placed his hand against hers. Though they could not share words, the meaning was clear. He had passed her test. He had proven loyalty not only to the hatchling but also to her people. Life in the colony became a strange mixture of challenges and quiet moments. Elias learned their ways. He observed their rituals, the way they honored the forest, the songs they sang at dusk. Slowly, he began to take part. He helped gather food, repaired shelters, and cared for the hatchling alongside the others. Though some remained suspicious of him, many grew curious, especially the younger ones. They would mimic his movements, laugh at his clumsy attempts to copy their gestures, and follow him as he worked. The hatchling, once fragile and frightened, began to grow stronger. It could walk longer distances, chirp more confidently, and even play with the alien children. Yet it never strayed far from Elias. Their bond had become unshakable. Sometimes the hatchling would curl against him at night, humming softly, as if reminding him that he was its protector, its family. Elias cherished these moments, even as he carried the weight of what they meant, but challenges never stopped. The colony faced threats not only from storms or predators, but also from rival groups of their own species. Elias found himself standing beside them during tense encounters, shielding the hatchling while the queen led her people. Though he could not fight as they did, his presence mattered. His loyalty was clear, and his calm courage gave the hatchling confidence. That, in turn, reassured the queen. Elias realized that every trial had shaped him. He was no longer just a researcher. He was part of something greater, a bridge between two species who had long feared each other. The colony had accepted him not because of his strength, but because of his compassion and loyalty. And as he sat one evening beneath the glowing canopy of the forest with the hatchling asleep in his arms and the queen watching from a distance, Elias understood. He had earned his place here. As weeks turned into months, Elias's life in the colony became more settled, yet no less extraordinary. What had begun as an act of protection had transformed into something much larger. The queen no longer watched him with suspicion but with quiet respect. She allowed him freedoms no human had ever been granted. He could walk through the colony, observe their rituals closely, and even share food with her people. He was no longer just an outsider. He was something different, something rare. The hatchling grew quickly, its once small frame now stronger and more independent. It could climb the organic towers, swim in the shallow streams, and communicate with its kin. Yet, despite its growth, it never drifted far from Elias. Their bond had deepened into something unbreakable. Wherever Elias went, the hatchling followed, chirping happily or nuzzling close when it sensed danger. The queen saw this, and though she said nothing, her eyes revealed a truth. Elias had become part of her child's life in a way even she had not expected. This bond began to change more than just their daily lives. Word spread among the colony that a human had protected one of their young and earned the queen's trust. Other groups, once wary, began to visit. They watched Elias, curious, sometimes skeptical, but often impressed. They saw the hatchling thriving under his care, and it challenged their beliefs about humans. Perhaps humans were not only dangerous intruders, perhaps they could also be protectors. One evening, as the forest glowed with bioluminescent plants, the queen summoned Elias. She led him to the heart of the colony where the largest tower rose high above the trees. There, surrounded by her closest advisors and elders, she acknowledged him formally. She extended both hands, a gesture of highest respect, and the colony echoed with soft melodic sounds. Though Elias did not understand the words, he understood the meaning. He was no longer a guest, he was bound to them, part of their story and part of their future. Elias felt a deep weight in that moment. He thought of his people, the humans, who might never understand his choice. He thought of the risks he had taken, the dangers he had faced, and the life he had left behind. Yet as he looked at the hatchling, now standing proudly beside him, and at the queen who had once viewed him as an enemy, he felt peace. His decision had not only saved a life, but also built a bridge between two worlds. Time passed, and Elias found joy in simple things, teaching the hatchling to mimic human words, sharing stories with curious alien children, helping the colony adapt to storms and dangers. He realized he had changed as much as they had. He was stronger, more patient, more aware of the delicate threads that bound all life together. He no longer thought of himself as separate from the colony, but as part of it. Yet one truth remained clear. The queen would not release him. Not because he was a prisoner, but because he had become too important. To her, to the hatchling, and to the future of both their species. Elias did not resist, he understood. His place was here now, not as a captive but as a guardian, a bridge, and a symbol of what was possible when trust overcame fear. And so, under the vast canopy of stars, Elias embraced his new life. The hatchling chirped happily at his side. The queen stood with quiet pride, and the colony thrived in the unity they had created. What had begun with a single act of compassion had grown into a story that would be remembered for generations. A human who shielded an enemy's child, and in doing so, found a family among those he once thought unreachable. The jungle sang around them, alive with hope and harmony. Elias smiled, knowing that his journey was far from over. But whatever came next, he would face it not alone, but with the bond that had changed everything.